All right, I think we are ready to start. So welcome to today's webinar, where we're all celebrating Open Access Week. My name is Martin Jagerhorn, and I am head of business development at Kronos Hub. And I'll be your host for the next hour or so. And the topic is probably no surprise. We'll talk about open access challenges and solutions. And for you that know Kronos Hub as a company and open access management platform, you also know that we typically talk about the common challenges we have today with fragmentation, silos, and a lot of manual work. But also, common challenges and differences from the three different perspectives that funders, publishers, and institutions have on open access. It's therefore an immense pleasure for us to have representatives of all these three stakeholder groups with us here today. So we'll gain a lot more insights into those commonalities and differences. We'll hopefully also see the need and the value of a collaboration between the stakeholder groups. So let me therefore introduce you to today's speakers. Hopefully you can all see my screen here as well. Instead of introducing every speaker in detail, I think we can just conclude that all our speakers today have a lot of experience, at least 10 to 20 years of academic publishing in one way or the other, and specifically on open access and open science. From the funder's perspective, we'll hear it from Tom Jacobs, who's head of data management and digital transformation at the Luxembourg National Research Fund, or FNR in short. Michaela Crespo-Quesada will continue with the institutional perspective based on her experience of working as open access coordinator at the University of Lausanne. And Sibylle Geisenheiner is director of open science strategy and licensing. We'll round up the presentations with a view from the American Chemical Society. So we won't have any presentation or demo from Kronos Hub today. So if you want that, then we recommend you to watch our YouTube channel or book a demo meeting or so directly over our website. But we do have Christian Grubach here with us today as founder and co-CEO of Kronos Hub, and he'll join the panel discussion. So throughout today's session, please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A section. So there's a small icon in Zoom to allow you to do that. And then we'll try to get all of those questions answered. If we do not have the time to answer all questions, we'll try to get back to you after this webinar to complete any missing answers in that way. And we have about 100 people registered for today's webinar. We'll see how many that join, but just so you all know, you will all get a recording of the session probably during next week. All right, so in summary, the program starts with individual presentations by FNR, UNIL, and ACCESS. And then we'll move over to a more interactive part where our speakers will engage in a panel discussion and answer a number of questions. I'll ask them, but hopefully you will also ask some challenging questions, so we have an interesting discussion here going on. So with that said, it's my pleasure to hand over to Tom Jacobs for the funder perspective.
Thank you, Martin. I will share my screen. Okay. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Also thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to us. My name is Tom Jacobs and I work in research funding since 2008. My main responsibilities are in the area of digital transformation, where I manage the deployment and implementation of new and innovative platforms and services. And I also represent my organization in the areas of data management and open science. I will give today a brief introduction into open access and open science in Luxembourg and the journey that we are currently on. By doing so, I feel that I have to say first a few words on who we are and what we do. So the Luxembourg National Research Fund, or short FNR, is the main funder of research activities in Luxembourg. We have a governmental mission to manage public funds and private donations for research projects with an increased emphasis on core strategic areas for the country. We also have a mission of promoting scientific culture and raising public awareness for research and science. And last but not least, we are playing a central role in advising the Luxembourg government on research policies and strategies. As part of our various missions and funding instruments, we are also actively supporting and funding open access to publications. For this, I have to make a short dive into the past. So up until 2016, we have provided funding for publications via grant project budgets with no dedicated policy on open access. In 2017, we introduced an open access policy, which required our grantees to publish with CC BY licensing, having to acknowledge FNR, and having to respect embargo periods of up to 6 months maximum. To cover APCs, we introduced a dedicated open access funding instrument. And now, since this year, since January, we have a policy that is compliant with Plan S, and we integrated our open access fund into ChronosHub. Before I tell you more on that, let me tell you about the challenges of our previous open access funding model. So the program framework of that program was to set up set up an annual call for applications that allowed the reimbursement of APCs that occurred during the previous year. That had several drawbacks, as it was painful for institutions to collect all the data on publications, and for us as FNR to review each and every publication for its eligibility. So there was often a high amount of ineligible requests, as grantees often either forget to acknowledge FNR, do a wrong acknowledgement, apply a wrong license because they just don't know better, or simply don't pay attention to embargoes and other requirements that we gave them. Lastly, also the fund had a very bad scalability because the administrative work increased tremendously with an ever-growing number of applications and publications that passed through it. So where do we stand today? Today we enable direct open access through ChronosHub. So our grantees can access via ChronosHub a journal finder that directly allows them to check policy compliance and also confirms the amount that we can fund. Providing all the checks from the very start, the risk for human error has diminished tremendously. So the grantee has a security of funding and can, if wish, in many cases directly submit his manuscript via ChronosHub or register it simply after the submission. We as FNR, we can directly validate the eligibility and, if a compliance error may occur, still request a modification. Lastly, we can directly fund the APCs as they occur. But our work on open access and open science is not limited to this alone. So since this year, we also have a policy on research data management and require that data sets underpinning publications must be stored in an open repository. We also require grantees to write and keep up-to-date data management plans for their projects. Beyond policymaking, we are also active members in various initiatives such as the Open Access Switchboard, ORCID, and also we are members of the EOSC Association, Coalition S, and various working groups on open science. We actively support our national consortium in negotiating transformative agreements, and we offer full coverage of APCs in such agreements. Last but not least, we try to become an active driver for change in research culture by trying new ways to evaluate projects' proposals by asking, for example, for narrative CVs, by actively supporting working groups on gender, and by giving awards to scientific achievements beyond publications, and by awarding good mentorship of students and teams, for example. To wrap up, a few words on what's in our books for the future. So we are currently actively looking into setting up a national portal for open science. By that, we mean a place where the many research outputs in Luxembourg can become truly findable and accessible. We are also taking steps into preparing our research landscape into becoming a part of a future European Open Science Cloud. And we also plan a dedicated funding instrument for supporting open science initiatives and good practices. We also see it as part of our mission to support our stakeholders, the research institutions, in achieving open science. This by helping the administrations in the management of APCs and publications to reduce the existing issues of APCs in the wild today. Also to support them in good data stewardship, which becomes more and more important. And lastly, by continuing to highlight over and over again the importance, most of all, the benefits of open access and open science. That's it from me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's very helpful to understand sort of the very innovative and I think progressive research funder. So we'll turn our eyes now into the institutional perspective, and I'll hand over to Michaela.
Thanks, Martin. I'll share my screen. Okay. So thanks a lot for inviting me and yes, opening this discussion among three of the key stakeholders in all this open access business. Much of what Tom already said also happens at an institutional level. So what I'll just briefly introduce myself, it's Micaela Crespo. I'm coordinator of open access at UNIL, which means that I counsel the direction of the university, and I also develop the strategy, the policies, and the services that go around open access at our institution. What we face from an institutional standpoint is that there are more and more open access mandates. We have a 100% OA mandate by the SNSF, the Swiss National Science Foundation. There's Plan S, to which Switzerland is not directly still yet. I would say we do not have to comply with Plan S so far. But we also have a 100% OA Swiss national strategy, which was approved a few years ago, and that says that we should reach 100% open access by 2024. On top of that, as Tom mentioned, we now have an open research data national strategy, which is going in the same direction. So it feels like open access started the way, and now open data is catching up, and it's going to be the next step. But in any case, open science is an increasingly important factor in everything that has to do with research, be it getting research funding, doing quality research, doing outreach, or the sharing of the results, for example. But it's not the only one, and that's the most important point, is that there is an increasing number of requirements, and researchers find themselves in front of a huge pile of admin and other factors that are not directly related to the research subject, which could be ethics, actual financial monitoring, open science, open access data. They need to think about personal data now. There's a lot of things that pile up. So our goal is to actually free up their time and their mind so that they can focus on the research and not on all of these other things that are very important, but that are not easy or not always easy to grasp at a researcher level. So what we did here at UNIL is that we set up a strategy and an action plan for open science 2019, 2021. It will be revised this year again. And we base ourselves on 5, I would say, pillars: governance, organization, infrastructure and tools, training and advice, and culture change and communication. So we have 5 axes. And we, I would say, structure both of our open access and open data activities in these 5 prongs of the strategy. For open access, in the governance, we have a policy. We have a very lenient policy and very, not very restrictive policy, because this is Switzerland. But we strongly encourage people to publish in open access. And what's most important for us, we try to set the conditions so that doing it is the only obvious or easy way to do. And if we go a bit deeper into the open access part of the work we do with open science, we get to what we very recently called the strategy or support 360. What we mean by this is that we now tackle all the roads of open access. And so we will have institutional support to Platinum Road, the Gold Road, the Green Road, the Hybrid Road. And of course, we also have the last link of the circle, which is probably the most important one, which are resources and support to bring all of that together. We have different, I would say, projects in each of these roads. For Platinum, we have an open access publishing platform where our editors can publish their internally edited journals. For the Gold Road, we have an institutional fund, and we also have deals with gold publishers. For the Green Road, we have a repository and a lot of support around it. And for the Hybrid Road, we are, of course, a member of our read and publish agreements and transformational agreements. But all of these needs to be tied up by something that brings it all together, because there are so many resources and things, but they're all scattered and it's difficult to know where you have to go. So one of these examples is Papago. It's a little tool we developed at the university that is Papago means parrot in Esperanto, and it's a decision tree, and depending on the questions, on the answers you give to the 5 or 6 questions that it will ask you, you will end up in one of the branches, and you will receive a personalized sheet with your situation, your possibilities of financing, and other stuff. So this is an example of what we tried to do. Is like there are so many options, so many ways of doing it. Let's just bring everything into one thing. And of course, Kronos Hub ties into this because now we have different sources of financing. So this Papago was more of a way of explaining what their options were, but now we also have financing streams that need to be all as well centralized somehow, so that people don't have to think about which fund they have to use to pay for their publications, but rather that it happens transparently without them having to worry about that. So just to finish, since we're in Switzerland, we like the clock analogy. And so, as I said, we tackle all of the roads. We have different projects, which I think all of them mentioned. Yes, for Hybrid, very strongly underlined that we only supported in the framework of transformative agreements. And of course, the intermediate gears and cogs, which are the people that work here, the people that counsel our researchers, our resources, the website trainings, and Kronos Hub that will be also one of these cogs. So with that, I will give the floor back.
Well, thank you a million, Michaela. That was very insightful, and I really enjoyed all those analogies, the Swiss clock, and hopefully Kronos Hub will play one of the most important parts in that, of course. But all that said, thank you very much, and we'll turn our eyes to the publisher review. Sibylle.
Yes, thank you. Try to share my screen. Can you see it? Perfect. Okay, yes, hello everyone, and thanks Martin for the nice introduction and for having me today as well, and to the other panelists, very interesting, and I think the end of my presentation will maybe loop into where Tom started with. So yes, what I will do is really give a short overview on where the American Chemical Society is in regards of open science and a status quo of transformative agreements, read and publish agreements. But then I will also look at an example to really see if that road with transformative agreements is really stable enough, or the way how we do it right now to finally fundamentally change the system, and really what are the challenges we can see from that one example. So just for a short recap, I mean, we are the American Chemical Society, so everything ACCESS Publishing does has chemistry in the center, and the focus is on the author. In 2013, ACCESS introduced author choice, an open access license model that was tailored to the needs of the authors at that time followed by all kinds of discount programs such as author rewards, which was coming along with a $60 million financing from the ACCESS to make open access publishing more attractive. We have open access journals such as ACCESS Central Science and Omega, which came out in 2015, 2016. And in 2016, ACCESS funded this for other chemical societies, ChemArchive, so a preprint server for chemistry. In 2020, we announced a complete new portfolio of gold journals, Jack's Gold, and 9 other community-based journals, which have been opened for submission in the beginning of 2021. And in addition, we started with read and publish contracts and agreements in 2017. One of the most recent developments is as well that we signed DORA at the beginning of 2021. But let's look a little bit closer on read and publish agreements. So ACCESS strongly prolongs this path. And for those maybe who are unfamiliar with the read and publish term or transformative agreements, this is describing really a contract between an institution and a publisher where reading access and the possibility for affiliated researchers to publish gold open access are combined. They are sometimes called read and publish or publish and read, or sometimes there are things called subscribe to open. So there are different models under that terminology. By now, authors from institutions in the UK, Germany, Netherlands, the US, just to name a few, are able to publish via ACCESS read and publish agreements in their hybrid, well-known hybrid portfolio, and in many cases also in the new gold journals. ACCESS has therefore developed a clear and transparent model to support this transition. Offers are adapted to the very special and individual situations of institutions or countries. And you might have heard about it. That is really all over the place. The big challenge here is really where we have situations when the output of an institution or a consortia or a country does not really correlate in any way with the financial possibilities. In such situations, many compromises have to be made on both sides, and those contracts are really long. It take a long time and a lot of resources to settle. But when these compromises are found, and that you can see here on the right-hand side of that slide, those transformative agreements have an astonishing effect on the open access output. And we really see, in most cases, over 90% of OA uptake from the authors publishing in those agreements. And this is really, last but not least, due to the workflow behind, because it is by now very different from just a couple of years ago, I would say, really by now supported by a lot of tools in the background who help the author to find the path through and have a very seamless experience and hassle-free experience as well, and understand really what steps to take, and not worrying about the fact that maybe at some point somebody is going to send them an invoice or something. So these workflows are very intuitive and transparent and easy to control for the institutions as well. And we take feedback all the time to really implement those if things don't really work the way they should. So we really try to make those things work for the author, for the institution, but as well for us. But is that all enough? So I'm now just looking at one funder here, just to illustrate the complexity. And those numbers are from the Horizon 2020 dashboard. Horizon 2020 is a scientific funding program of the EU, and also signatory of Plan S or Coalition S. But these numbers are not cleaned up, I have to say. It's a dimension is behind that. So even if they just for 50% true, but most likely it will be more, you can see really how complex it is, how many entities, if we want to take as entity an institution, but also a grantee, not to talk about all the co-authors behind, the countries and regions involved, in how many output this is really going. So it's close to 7,000 peer-reviewed publications in just for 2020, with over 2,600 publishers. They are suddenly, the result we achieved with transformative agreements sound very tiny. We have 24 countries and we have 300 institutions. I mean, not all of those publishing chemistry stuff, but it is really getting complex. And from my perspective, the really important step to take is really to get more funders very much engaged into those agreements. And this is why I said at the beginning, this is maybe coming close to what Tom started with, and that it's good to see that for Luxembourg, there seems to be a plan behind it. But this is unfortunately not true for all situations. And this is really where I see a big challenge going forward, also having in mind 2024 as a date. And so there is still a lot to solve in between. And maybe just to say, we from our side really try to and it's some kind of baby steps there as well, but for us it's also a great step. So for example, we just joined into an agreement with Kronos Hub to actually have a journal finder for our authors as well, so they get a better orientation at that point when they start submitting. Is that path I want to go down right for me? Is it compliant with the funder? Is there a transformative agreement behind? What are the ways for me to be compliant with all the mandates? And I think this is closing nicely to the beginning, and I'm very looking forward to the discussion now.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Sibylle. And I think we all got very good perspectives on sort of all the three different angles. At Kronos, we always try to put the author experience first. So we should have had a number of researchers involved as well, probably. But that's difficult to represent in a fair way. So we'll have to do with these three stakeholders. And I think we'll simply start with going back to the funder perspective, Tom. So we've obviously heard about a lot of different challenges that you've gone through, and now going forward, what would you point out as sort of the main challenge from a funder perspective, and especially related to how you think that publishers could help solve those challenges?
Well, I think a common topic that came out of all the presentations turns around complexity. So I see that one of the main issues in open access for me is the complexity, or for the researcher, is the complexity of knowing how to do the right thing. I admit and I see that from all the policies that we put out, from all the rules that are out there, for the researcher, it can be overwhelming to know and remember all the rules when all they want to do is publish a paper. So they really have to think like, what's my funder's policy? What license do I have to apply now here? Did I now click the right box there? Whatever. It's also clear that a publisher cannot know the 1,000 different rules from funders of all over the world. So here's really the common ground should be that we all in our silos should look like, what can we do together to reduce that amount of complexity? There are good practices that I see. I mean, publishers that try to help the funder to see like, look, is that your funder? Okay, then pay attention. This funder might probably not pay for that publication. Or if you select that funder, you have to select this sort of license, otherwise you will not get the funding. This is something hard to achieve, but I think it's the right way. So if we all start to work together in a certain sense to make the life easier for the researcher, I think that should be our ultimate goal in this endeavor.
Okay, so more in terms of standardization and commonalities in that sense then. Right. But just a sort of a question. I saw on your slide, you mentioned a number of initiatives where FNR is involved. How many of those initiatives involve different types of stakeholders, publishers, for example? Is that a common thing, or is it?
It is a common thing. I believe that in most of the initiatives that we are part of, be it of Coalition S, where there is exchange with publishers that are willing to exchange with Coalition S. Same in the switchboard. Same applies for other working groups on open science in general. So there we have stakeholders that are not only funders, but also institutions, research performing organizations. So the exchange is there, and it all turns around a certain common topic of complexity. And there really we have to give us means to find solutions. Yes.
Excellent. All right. So if we then look at the institutional perspective versus the funder, so turning the question around a little bit, Michaela, do you see anything in particular that you would like to highlight that funders should think about to make lives a little bit easier for institutions?
I think we're pretty much aligned with what Tom just said. It should be more transparent, more clearer, more transparent, and easier for researchers to do this. So it's usually, the problem with this is that it's usually decided, as you said, or discussed among institutions, funders, publishers, and then the researchers are outside. And then when things are decided, maybe they're not taking into consideration the perspective of the final user, which is those who actually do the open access. So I think this should be, yes, more researcher centric. And yes, I guess we're going through a transition, but at some point things will have to be severely simplified, especially if I think of read and publish agreements. It's a maze. It depends on what publisher you're dealing with. You usually have a list of titles that are included but not others, and then you have to explain to the researchers, but why aren't they all included? They don't care if they are society titles or if they are first-year journals that didn't make it into the license. This should be more simpler and more transparent.
Right. So essentially you're saying that we are all needing more alignment across the different stakeholder groups, and also facilitate through also, again, more standardization, and maybe as we all know, as you mentioned, the vocabulary in itself is sort of overwhelming with a lot of different definitions.
And legal aspects, researchers are not legal experts, and neither are we actually. So we can give them advice, but it's not always, it's always a gray area when we're replying. But I guess Plan S it's an attempt at that. It's a bold attempt at that, but maybe we'll get to that kind of model in a few years.
Excellent. So Christian, from a platform perspective, what are your views, and what do you think that we can focus on to really try to create these bridges to a better extent?
Yeah, I think that my first comment would be around, would echo Michaela's comment on understanding. I think one of our primary objectives here at Kronos Hub is to interpret what these policies actually mean. We have people here with us who do nothing else but interpret policies. And some of these policies are so complex that it will take them a lot of time to interpret it. And now, being an author, having to publish or wanting to publish, to figure these out is very difficult. And what we see is simple concepts, or something we might find simple, like CC BY licenses, is a foreign concept to a lot of researchers, especially first time. So I think one of the things that we are trying to apply here is the user first view to the platform, to any engagement we have with authors, with university staff, funders, publishers, because it's getting quite technical, especially with the new policies coming out, the read and publish agreements. What are they? Are they transformative? Are they not? That's a lot of responsibility to put on the authors. So basically, taking whatever policies decided and try to make it human readable. Second thing is consideration is around integration and interoperability. We do see a space where a lot of spreadsheets are exchanged, and we do see a space where a lot of people spend their days working data, cleaning data, and they're doing it in silos. So to give you an example, 2 universities working on the same project may spend the time cleaning up the data twice without knowing it. So this is what we are trying, at least how we're thinking about it, is to facilitate those resources so you don't have to do things twice. You may have to do it twice, but you're improving the original data set. So those are some of our consideration, and our hope for the future is obviously that more platforms will adopt ways to integrate open APIs, which will in turn allow all of us to get access to better data.
Right, thank you. Excellent. So when we talk about then, this kind of situation that Sibylle described with, I think, only for 20 years Horizon funded projects, that involves over 2,600 publishers, I think you said, Sibylle. How can we, I mean, if we are to standardize, that means that we need to get these 2,600 publishers essentially to adopt the same standards. How can we make that happen? Does anyone have a good suggestion? Maybe Christian, you're raising your hand there, but yeah.
Well, just to say that there's a lot of talk about standardization, and I think this, and I'd love to hear Sibylle's response to this, but because I think the publishers in general are faced with a lot of requests, a lot of requirements, and not every publisher has the technical capabilities, has the resources. So maybe the answer isn't standardization, or complete standardization at least. There are a lot of services out there who are experts in interpreting data, cleaning data, and so forth. I think the difficult part, at least right now, is the access. But I'd love to hear your views on that, Sibylle.
Yeah, I think we all need to be realistic. That's not doable. And yeah, it's. I just saw a tweet today by Coalition S about look at ESA, this many agreements with 40 publishers, where I think 40 publishers, that number didn't really change over the last 2-3 years. It's always the same publishers with new agreements. And okay, we are SOC-PC member as well, so there are society publishers as well, but they have the output there is also limited. Not that these agreements don't cause work, or on many sites. So if you have 40 papers and you have to agree on a read and publish agreement, or you have 4,000 papers and you have to agree on a read and publish agreement, it has a similar complexity. And if we feel the complexity as, I would say now, one of the largest society publisher, how does it feel if you have 1 or 2 journals? And how do you manage to do that? My biggest fear is here that a lot of those smaller society publishers go under the umbrella of big commercial publishers here and try to get around all that complexity by using an existing infrastructure or access to those agreements, and that we really somehow damage that so far very, very diverse field of publishers.
Okay, interesting. So how do you see that then, Tom, from a funder's perspective? I mean, Coalition is there, I guess, to standardize a little bit, to have more common policies for at least one group of funders? Do you believe that it's doable, that we can facilitate this much, agree on standards and have identical policies, making it more transparent and understandable for researchers, or is this also possible?
Well, that's one thing of what Plan S is trying to do, or what Coalition S is to do, that at least the funders that are on board of that initiative do align in their policy, so that at least for them, and as we see, it's still a growing number of supporters, that this is a movement that has started and that is on its way, and that does its share in creating more common rules, at least from the funders' perspective. Of course, there is a risk. There is a risk of publishers going under the rails because of that. I do believe that risk was also present already before. It might be that the Coalition S movement is accelerating that for certain publishers, but it's not the cause of it, not the central cause at least. But yes, so funders are actually with each other in many initiatives interested in aligning policies. We do see as funders, at least on the European level, that having different policies, non-aligned policies, different set of rules and complexities is causing problems most and foremost for the researchers. And we all have, I think, a common interest in aligning that as much as we can. And I can say, at least for my part, that we do that as FNR, and I see that persistence also in other funders in going that way.
Mm-hmm. Sibylle, you want to comment?
Yes, I do see that as well with Plan S, but if you look at it closer, then you will see that already in that group of 23 funders, I don't have the exact amount in my head now, even there is differences in the speed, in the routes, in the road map for implementation, how they call it. So if you see even that group can't really precisely go down on one concept, there the complexity goes. And I mean, you see that not just on the funder side, you see that on the publisher side, some accept green OA, zero embargo, others don't. Some just do diamond OA, others charge APCs, they charge APCs on different levels. So all that complexity, and there we have this word again, and maybe that is one of the things, is really hard to work on. And this really needs the movement from all participants. And so this is why I think, yes, talking to each other is one of the key things we need to do, is really to try to understand why things are as they are and why things don't move as quick as they should. And don't forget about really the researcher at the end, who is in between all that demands from all sides. And yes.
Excellent. So there are a lot of questions I would actually like to ask you as well. So when we now hear about the different challenges to make, for example, a group like Plan S or Coalition S to agree on a policy, how do you see this ability in terms of open access business models? Because we hear criticism more or less against every kind of model, and it apart from the ones that are free for everyone, right? Free to publish, free to read, like Diamond, but it still needs to be funded. So I guess from a publisher perspective, how do you see the future? Do you see that there will be less or more open access business models, first of all? The more models we have, the more complexity for the authors again. Is there a silver bullet? Can you outline a little bit what you believe will be sort of a future scenario if we look at sort of 5 years from now?
There will not be a final model which will solve all challenges. That will not be the case. And I mean, I'm in that industry that more than 20 years. When I started, we had CD-ROMs, bibliographic CD-ROMs and things like that. So the business models will really always adapt to the time. And I mean, Read and Publish started about 6 years ago or something like that. It's still pretty new. It has now developed all the workflows in the background. So I think now other steps are possible. And this is why maybe I come back to that funder side as well. And the experience funders made, they did OA policies, but nobody really cared or monitored, or it was too difficult to monitor. Now, actually, we do have the tools. So I could go tomorrow to the EU and tell them, okay, this is your publishing output. Your authors publish in those journals. If we agree in an agreement, we could possibly make it available for, allow all authors to publish open access and centrally funnel those, resolving the APC payments through that model. That's the technology is there now. There would be a clear understanding. And that, in fact, would finally do something good for the institutions as well, because on their end, they really just need to look for the researchers who are just funded by the institution, or really where no additional funding is available, and really concentrate on that side where the rest is really out of the way. And so I think this could be something solving a lot of problems, because in this point also it doesn't care where the author sits. If it is an author in South Africa or someone in Honolulu, I don't know. If they have EU funding available, that could run through that channel. And that would already help a big step forward, or would help us to make a big step forward, because I don't think that this institution by institution or consortia by consortia or country by country thing is something which will get us over the line.
Michaela, it sounds like that's something that you may want to comment.
Yeah, that's the utopia, right? Where we get one model and that neither the researchers nor the readers need to pay to actually read the articles. But it is, yes, wishful thinking probably, at least for a very long time. No, I agree. It will still be complicated. I agree that we've seen publishers adapt to the new constraints that are coming up, and they're very, very creative, and they come up with very complex things to actually fit in and answer to those demands. But in our case, from our side, of course, there's enormous appetite to simplify all this and to get to at least maybe pure publish model rather than read and publish agreements. Something that it's a bit easier to manage as well from our side. And of course, I think funders and societies should be promoting as well DORA and platinum journals. I don't know, all kinds of, again, bibliodiversity, so that we shift a bit more towards a more inclusive publishing, I would say, ecosystem where all kinds of these journals can subsist, because mainly, as we see, especially in the STM fields, there's still pressure to publish in, of course, first-tier journals, which are not the first to turn platinum. So yes, I think there's a long road ahead, but worth walking.
Okay, excellent. Right, I think time has come to round up today's webinar with a very interesting panel discussion, and I will just try and attempt to make some concluding remarks. I tried to make some notes while you were all presenting. So let's see if we can share my screen here again. Can you see it all right? I'm sure not to have captured everything and maybe not everything in the right way and order. And this was, of course, a little bit prepared based on some of the input I got previously. But I think it's fair to say that we all agree, all three stakeholder groups, on a number of different aspects and topics. One is that we do all want actually more collaboration, even if it sometimes sounds like there is more friction and fights out there between primarily funders and publishers maybe. But there are a lot of initiatives where the different stakeholders obviously then come together, as Tom also highlighted. And this can be not only between funders, institutions, and publishers, of course, but a lot with third parties that can play an important role to facilitate this, whether that is for all these smaller publishers, for example, that do not have the same resources. And that was mentioning primarily the OE switchboard, but I think it's fair to say it also goes for a lot of other initiatives like institution repositories, CRIS systems at institutions, and the journal checker tool from the CoalitionS. We also heard a lot about best practices around every institution actually should have a clear open access strategy that we saw Michaela present for UNIL. Another best practice is that we try to put the author experience first. I think we heard that a number of times, whether that is just to understand the vocabulary, so the open access vocabulary, or simply not having to know all these different details, but to be guided. And also another best practice, as Michaela explained, the centralization of an open access fund for the institution is a great means to implement an open access strategy, because you can centralize and get things under control and less APCs in the wild, and you get the data that you need to do different kinds of monitoring and better develop things proactively. But there are a lot of challenges around standardization. That's what we do need. We think there is not one model that fits all. We heard with business models, they will probably continue to increase. And that increases the complexities. So we better try to work together to help at least reduce that complexity where possible. So CoalitionS is, I think, doing a great job in going in that direction, even though it's not completely identical for all in that group. And a lot of other interesting initiatives around data standards and formats, of course. And a key that Christian mentioned as well, in terms of trying to unburden the different stakeholders, and particularly the researchers, is automation. And automation typically means that we need to work also on standards seen to persistent identifiers. No one really mentioned FAIR here, but the FAIR principles in terms of making data findable, accessible, identifiable, and reusable is a key, of course, so that our systems can communicate and the data can move between the different stakeholders. So with that said, I just want to thank all our speakers and of course all our participants for joining. It's been a pleasure having you here and looking forward to increased collaboration going forward. Thank you very much, everyone.